Welcome to the first public OAC webinar program, and thank you for joining us in this strange 2020 year. This Zoom magic is brought to you using the skills and determination of our very brave Zoom committee led by Kate McCormick and Jane Scourge. Our learning curve has been steep, so we do ask for your patience. I'm Linda Chittenden, and in a moment, I will turn this over to Susan Sweet, who will introduce our speaker, Kathie Fischer. But first, I want to tell you that I'm partnering this afternoon with others on the Zoom committee, Deborah Duck, Cherry Jones, and Jane Scourge, to produce this OAC webinar program. We are here to help. That means if you have a Zoom question, click on the chat icon, select all panelists, and write your question. Or you can text or call one of us directly. Also, these phone numbers are included in the reminder email you received probably just an hour ago. Now, if as you're listening to Kathie, you realize you want to ask her a question, click on the Q&A icon, write your question, and it will go to Susan. And now here is Susan to introduce my pal, Kathie Fischer.
But I am happy to introduce Kathie Fischer. Many of you probably already know Kathie either from living in Marin, visiting Green Gulch, or her teaching at Park and Mill Valley Middle School for 28 years. Perhaps you could have bumped into her in the ocean, continuing her love of science as a scuba diver. She retired 4 years ago from teaching 7th grade science at Mill Valley Middle. She began her Buddhist journey back in the 70s. A native Californian, she has spent most of her life in the Bay Area. She is a Zen master, which gives her an opportunity to continue her passion for teaching. She's currently involved with Zoom teaching Buddhist students in several countries and languages. I'm pleased that she's going to share more about her journey and give us some insight about meditating. In 2020, most of us have reason to seek some tools for managing this new way of living. Kathie is open for questions, so please send any you have during the program, and we will have a Q&A at the end. And that is time for Kathie Fischer.
Anyway, I'm so happy to be here with everybody, and I understand we're a large group, and it is so odd to be alone in my room with my computer and my iPad, talking to my computer with the idea that there is a large group there somewhere listening. This is the gift of our times, a strange gift, but we're grateful to have this capacity to be together and to meet together during these trying times. So I noticed that the title of my talk is something like The Evolution of a Zen Master. My title for my own talk was My Life in Zen, with a nod to Edith Piaf, My Life in Pink. So My Life in Zen. What I thought I would do is, first of all, give a very broad stroke history of Buddhism, which is like a very broad stroke, just to place us all in the same map of what I'm talking about today. And then I'll talk a little bit about the teachings of Buddhism, and then I'll talk about the community where I've primarily practiced for the last 50 years. And then at the end, I'll talk about a little bit about the meditation practice, which is the core of the thing. And we'll be sure to leave time for questions and comments. So Buddhism was founded by an Indian man from an aristocratic family He was born about 2,500 years ago in what is now Nepal. He left his family, his child and wife and whole family at around the age of 30, and eventually became a famous teacher with a large following in northern India. After his death at about age 85, his followers continued his work in India, and in the following centuries, Buddhism spread throughout Asia, where it has thrived for these 2,500 years since Buddha's death. Zen Buddhism arose in China in about the 5th century AD, and it spread to Korea, to Vietnam, and to Japan. Excuse me. Buddhism is unique among the great world religions for its focus on this life more than an afterlife, and on Buddha as a human being rather than a god or a deity. Now that's a very broad and sweeping statement about a religion that encompasses so much geography, so much history, so many different peoples, such a big population. As such, it doesn't necessarily hold up to historical or doctrinal scrutiny, but it does, I think, speak to Buddhism's appeal to Westerners. The important teachings of Buddhism center around 3 points: that everything is impermanent, that life is characterized by suffering, and that there is no enduring essential self. Impermanence, I think, is apparent, especially as we get older. Even though a lot of our activity and our consciousness relies on thinking that things will stay more or less the same. Suffering refers to something a little different from pain in this sense. If pain is the variety of physical and mental and emotional sensations we experience every day, which have to do with simply having a body, moving around, and interacting with our environment. Suffering is the territory of wanting things to be other than they are. So hoping for something different, regretting what has happened, longing for that which is impossible. Things like that. No self means no enduring essence of a self. These days, we know from science that each of us is more of an ecosystem than a single organism. We contain large numbers of organisms like bacteria, fungi, protists, also viruses that our life and our good health depend upon. We are really and truly never alone. And this ecosystem we call ourself is in constant interaction with our surroundings. So this is the sense of no self, that is interconnectedness. Zen Buddhism is essentially pragmatic. That is, the core teaching is about how to help others more than adherence to a fixed cosmology or theology. There's a word in Buddhism, upaya. It means skillful means. And it refers to how Buddhist teaching responds to specific circumstances. And circumstances are different from person to person, time to time, and situation to situation. So the emphasis is on understanding the person and the circumstance and what would be most helpful in that setting. So there is a flexibility with doctrine and a focus on self-reflection and consciousness for the purpose of compassionate action and love. After World War II, Japanese people in this country, having been released from internment camps, found their lives and their communities in disarray. As had been the practice for decades, Japanese clergy were sent from Japan, providing leadership and support to American Japanese congregations. So in the 50s and 60s and 70s, there were some bright-eyed, newly arrived Japanese priests who caught the attention of beatniks and then hippies in the midst of those tumultuous years of radical reinvention and exploration. I count myself among them. In case you weren't there, I'll tell you, there was a perfect storm going on, especially in the West, but not only in the West, of disillusionment with lifestyle, with morality, with politics, especially with regard to the Vietnam War and the Jim Crow South, and widespread interest and effort toward reinvention of those things, often referencing historical periods, agrarian or ethnic lifestyles, and religious communities, and widespread experimentation with psychedelic drugs. Those forces encountered the austerity, the demanding meditation practice, and the endlessly fascinating aesthetic and customs of Japanese Zen Buddhism. Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, the founder of the San Francisco Zen Center, where I lived and practiced for over 20 years, was tending his Japanese American congregation in San Francisco when various unkempt, ragtag beatniks and hippies started showing up for meditation. Suzuki, realizing his Japanese congregation were not going to have the stomach for these very enthusiastic and insistent new members, began a separate meditation group for Westerners. This led to the founding of San Francisco Zen Center, eventually to the acquisition of the building on Page Street and Laguna in San Francisco, later Tassajara Monastery in the Los Padres National Forest, and Green Gulch Farm, which is right down the hill, which by 1976 or so housed and employed several hundred full-time practitioners. Businesses opened in the by the Zen Center in those years included a stitchery, a bakery, a bookstore, a grocery store, and finally Green's Restaurant. So what life is like in a Zen monastery or a Zen monastic community revolves around the schedule. A wake-up bell is rung at 3:30 or 4:30 in the morning, depending on the location and the season. And various temple instruments sound to call everyone to the meditation hall or the zendo. Morning meditation lasts 2 or 3 hours. It is very formal and rigorous. After breakfast and a brief break, practitioners gather for work meeting, work till lunch, then after a brief break, resume work till late afternoon, where there's an exercise and a bath hour, before returning to the zendo for service, then dinner, a brief break, and evening meditation. Silence is kept for much of the day. In the course of a week, there will be lectures and classes, but the rigorous daily schedule I described dominates one's experience. Practitioners were assigned to jobs of different durations, depending on the person's seniority. So you might be assigned to be in charge of the kitchen for 1 year, with a rotating crew of people who would be assigned for a few days or a few weeks or a few months. Jobs were not necessarily assigned based on skill or inclination. Meeting the challenge of a job that one was not prepared for was considered a positive opportunity for practice. Sometimes this went well, sometimes not so much. I don't think things are done quite that way anymore. Now there's more of a collaborative process in place. Tassajara Monastery is closed to visitors from September to late April, during which time the schedule is the most rigorous. Tassajara does have a guest season from May through August, a time when anyone can make a reservation to stay there and participate to whatever degree they choose in the meditation schedule. And there's also lots of workshops during the guest season, like yoga and so on. So in that setting of a rigorous schedule, day in and day out, we all grew up, grappling with issues such as leadership, sexuality, group process, inclusion, and so on. Because even though the monastic model is the basis for this life, there's so much that didn't fit. We just had to invent it. For example, in Japanese monasteries, men and women do not live together, do not marry or have children within the monastery. So we were inventing a new way to live communally in this country, as couples, families, raising children alongside single people while all practicing as monks. We grappled with the same issues that our whole society faced and faces, but kind of like in a test tube with a small known sample for study. For example, Zen Center found itself in the middle of the AIDS crisis, in part because several of our priests were gay activists on the front lines of the suffering experienced in the gay community in the early 80s and beyond. One of our priests established a Zen meditation center in the Castro, which eventually became a hospice for people with AIDS, where he himself died. I showed up at the Berkeley Zen Center at the age of 19 in 1971, and have pretty much lived in or close by Zen monastic communities ever since. I met my husband in Berkeley at the Berkeley Zen Center, and together we lived at the Tassajara Monastery for almost 5 years, and then lived at Green Gulch Farm for 15 years. And now we live at Muir Beach. At some point in the late 80s, I became interested in developing a lifelong career rather than rotating from job to job within the community, and decided to become a school teacher. Our twin sons, born in 1977, were raised entirely in Zen Center communities. They attended Mill Valley schools, and through them and other children in the community, I developed an interest in child development and education. So in the late 80s, I began teaching in Mill Valley while still living at Green Gulch Farm. I was lucky to have taught at Park School, across the hall from Linda Chittenden for 8 years. And during that time, I was lucky that Jim Derich and Judy Cooper served as principals, exemplary principals. And I then taught science at Mill Valley Middle until 2016 when I retired. Someone sent in a question about how my teaching school and practicing Zen have informed each other. We have a before meal chant that begins, innumerable labors brought us this food. We should know how it comes to us. I remember I taught second grade for 2 years, but then when I taught 5th grade, I remember thinking that that statement, innumerable labors brought us this food. We should know how it comes to us. I remember thinking that statement is a perfect science curriculum, that we could take a meal and track all the different foods, where they came from, what they are. We could track the packaging, the transportation, the energy flow, the water cycle, the carbon cycle, and so on. And I always kept that sort of perspective in my teaching, always tried to ground the concepts and information in kids' experience. Begin with kids' experience whenever possible. Once I learned about an activity, and I did the activity with my class, in which each student carried a trash bag for a week, collecting all the trash they generated, not trash with sharp edges or that would rot and stink. Then, at the end of the week, everyone emptied their bag on the classroom floor, where we sorted and measured and weighed the contents and separated them in different categories, paper, plastic, and so on. So I was lucky to arrive in the teaching profession along with whole language, inquiry-based science instruction, and Marilyn Burns in my classroom for math. I felt a strong continuity between those educational philosophies and Zen for their direct connection to students' lives and their pragmatism. But nobody gets a shortcut in really learning to teach. It takes a long time to really see the students, to see how to help them. I remember when my first grandchild was born in 2009. I walked into my 7th grade class and I saw all my students for the first time as somebody's precious grandchild. And then the people at the grocery store and the gas station as somebody's precious grandchild. And you know, that kind of learning is just dumb luck, just life. Maybe all those years of Zen practice helped me to notice, but I suspect those of you who are grandparents understand this. I want to try to convey something about a question you might have, something like, why would anyone want to do Zen in the first place, let alone spend a lifetime at it? So I thought I might talk a little bit about meditation practice, which is the core of the Zen life. In a nutshell, meditation practice can give us a window into the enormity of this human life. of just this human moment, the beauty and the depth of our brief stay on Earth. We can catch a glimpse of our legacy, our evolutionary inheritance, our interconnectedness, expressed through attention to breath. Simply breathing in and breathing out, and again, and again. We can bring to mind that our breath inside our bodies was once in this room and in the bodies of others in this room. People, dogs, cats, mice, flies. We all share this air. After all, that's why we need to wear masks these days. We are all connected by the Earth's atmosphere. We are all staying put on the ground due to the Earth's gravity. All living and non-living things are subject to the Earth's gravity. The Earth's gravity and the Earth's atmosphere are organizing principles for life on Earth, that and light from the sun. All life, regardless of location, inclination, or political affiliation, are organized by gravity, atmosphere, and sunlight. So bringing this to mind on a breath or two, several times a day, even a very busy day, even a very difficult day, can help us. It can be a touchstone. We all have busy lives. We all have to-do lists. We have anticipation of what's next while reflecting on what just happened, while rushing to make arrangements for something else. This is what our lives are like. In the midst of this, if we have a way to bring to mind the enormity of this human life, of this human moment, of the beauty and brevity of life on Earth, if we have a way to bring this to mind many times a day, even for just a moment, and if we do this each day, repeatedly, we may begin to experience our to-do list and all that as not a problem to get rid of, but simply residing in the wide lap of human life, similar to lives all around us and through history, similar to non-human life all around us and through long, long history. In this way, we find access to the vividness and the depth of our lives and the lives of others. It's not that we have to make it be so, more that through repetition, we allow to fall away that which covers it up. This is what meditation practice is. A time when we put aside our to-do lists and our handheld devices and simply breathe in and breathe out. Noticing our very strong habits to think and plan and regret and remember, but without acting on those habits for the duration of the meditation, even if it's just for 5 minutes. What comes of this practice is compassion. First for ourselves, in all our strident effort and foibles. And as we recognize each other in the same boat, we can widen our scope of compassion to include others. Then, when we stand up and go back to work, our hearts are a little bit more open, and our commitment to each other is deeper. So that's what I have to say about today and about my life in Zen. And I think that my talk looks like it was shorter than scheduled. So we have plenty of time to receive your questions and your comments. And I look forward to that discussion. And it's been such a pleasure to speak. The Outdoor Art Club, I've known about it for so long, and my dear friend Linda has been part of it, and other teachers that I've known. And so it's really a privilege to be invited to speak with you today, and I thank you for that.
And thank you, Kathie. It was a very informed and, for me, moving talk. I appreciate your information about your Buddhism and meditation. We do have a number of questions, and I'm going to start with one that I saw a couple of times, which is, everybody has noticed the beautiful quilt behind you, and if you could tell us a little about that.
Yes. So this quilt was made by, there's a group of women at Muir Beach who have gotten together every Wednesday for decades to do quilting. And they often make a quilt together and then raffle it off for a fundraiser. So this particular quilt is called the Millennial Quilt. It was made in 1999 and auctioned off at the Muir Beach picnic, the big picnic, in 2000. And it was on display for the Muir Beach community in advance of that raffle. And I looked at it and I was riveted. I just stopped in my tracks and said to myself, that is my quilt. And so I bought lots of raffle tickets and I won. So that's the quilt. That is made of, the different quilters have different styles. So there's one woman who does this intricate geometric kind of pattern. So there's a lot of that. And some of them are very intricate. And then there are some animals, like, can you see the owl? There's an owl. And behind me is a pelican. And there's chickens somewhere. There's, the row of mailboxes across the street from the Pelican Inn. You probably have seen those. A lot of people, we notice at Muir Beach that people stop and take pictures of those mailboxes a lot. So there's pictures of those mailboxes all over the world.
How and when do you schedule your meditation practice in your daily life?
Well, these days, my husband and I get up in the morning whenever we get up, and we have a little hut, and we go and we sit together. And we do that every morning. That's our usual practice at home. We also, in the course of a week or a month, each of us are involved in different Zen groups. And in those groups, we lead meditation activities. We lead meditation and give talks and things like that.
Okay, another question is, would you please recommend a book for someone wanting to learn more about Buddhism, for a beginner interested in learning more?
Well, there's a lot of wonderful books. There's more than a person could possibly name. The book that the founder of the San Francisco Zen Center is very famous for is called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And it's a series of talks that Suzuki Roshi gave in the 1960s. He died in 1971, so it was up to 71. And that's a lovely collection. And you can, and you know, it's short lectures, so you can read it. I know that Thich Nhat Hanh has wonderful books about Buddhist practice and Buddhist history. My husband writes books. He has a book on compassion, and he has a lot of good books. His name is Norman.
We have another request. If you could speak a little more about the Buddhist idea of no essential self. I spent the past week reading dream journals from the 80s. Although I've changed a lot, my essential dream symbol content, its language is remarkably consistent. What do you make of this?
Yeah, well, a no self doesn't mean that we don't exist. I mean, we walk around, you know, in this body, handling our life as it is, and there's no idea that we're trying to rid ourselves of this person, this identity. It's that this identity, as it is, doesn't have it's not made of an essential kernel hiding inside somewhere. It is a constant, constantly changing, constantly interacting entity. The fact is, so much of our life is made of repetition. Our habits, our ideas about how the world works, our ideas about who we are and what we're good at and what we're bad at and what we like and what we don't like. These things are pretty much made of decades and decades of repetition. So that sense that we have of a self, if we look closely, is made of repeating, oh, this is myself. Oh, this is myself. Oh, I like this. Oh, I like this. I had this dream. I always wanted to be this. So, and it's, the thing is that is what the self is made of. It's made of repetition. It's made of pattern, repetition over time. And that's not a problem. It's only a problem if we tend to think otherwise and operate as though this self is permanent, as though this self is enduring. In Buddhist teaching, that is what causes suffering. So what causes suffering is acting in such a way that is not the way things are. We kind of all know that.
Terrific. The next question is, how is Zen Buddhism different from the original Buddhism in terms of meditation, etc.?
Well, what you're calling the original Buddhism is what the Buddha taught and then what his followers continued with in India. And original Buddhism, the Vipassana movement has inherited something more like original Buddhism. But the fact of it is, we're talking about 2,500 years. So we're talking about a huge number of people interacting with the tradition, interacting with the teaching, and changing it all, you know, every step of the way. So Vipassana probably doesn't resemble original Buddhism any more than Zen does. I think that people who are inclined to check out Buddhism tend to be have rapport with one tradition or another. And there's a lot of different traditions. There's the Tibetan, there's the Zen, there's more than we can count. There's Vipassana. And each of these traditions have a little different style. The teachings are basically the same. There aren't any major differences between them. There's difference in language and definitely a difference in style. I would say that what I said earlier about Zen being pragmatic, that is characteristic of Zen. I'm not sure if I would say that that is as characteristic of the other Zen sects, but I really just know Zen. I have never practiced the other Zen sects.
Okay, the next question was, thank you for speaking, Kathie. Could you speak more about upaya and how does one cultivate that practice? And I hope I didn't butcher the pronunciation.
No, upaya. So upaya, which is called it's translated as skillful means. And so there's a lot of teachings about, there's one story in which, the story is there's children inside a burning building. And so to get the children out of the burning building, you don't say to the children, come out of the burning building. You say, children, there's a cart out here that's full of candy and special treats for you. Come on out. And then the children will come out of the burning building. So there's that's a whole teaching in Buddhism. So what it means is really and truly, and those of us who are or were school teachers really understand this, that the individual needs of a person determine their ability to hear what you're telling them. So, you can teach someone something that is so-called true, they don't have ears to hear it. They just don't. And all of us, I'm sure we've all experienced that. How when you're younger and you're learning to read, you learn a word and all of a sudden that word is everywhere. It's in every book you pick up, it's all over the place, it's all over the walls. You'd never seen it before, you never noticed it before, and all of a sudden it's everywhere. And that's how our minds work. So our minds cannot be open to everything all the time. So a skilled teacher does their best to help the individual student according to what their ears can hear and what they can do.
So the next comment is, we had the privilege to have our daughter have Kathie for 2 years at Park School. As a classroom volunteer, I watched Kathie's ability to manage the children with a Zen outlook. I'm wondering if any meditation training for teachers or children has happened in the schools.
That's a good question. I believe that these days there's work with mindfulness in the schools. And I myself never specifically did that with my students. I always felt that since, for me, meditation is a religious practice, I did not feel particularly comfortable bringing a religious practice into a public school classroom, knowing that not everyone has the same degree of comfort with that. But mindfulness training in the schools and throughout our society, I think, is entirely secular, and I think it can be very, very helpful. Definitely for students and for teachers in a classroom and pretty much for anyone.
Is a generic meditation, is there an online guided meditation you could recommend for people that want to learn or just start practicing?
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
I know there's a lot online, but I have never checked into it, and I've never checked it out for anyone. So I'm sure someone here knows more about that than I do. But yes, there's a lot of meditation guides.
Okay. Another question is Green Gulch still going on in the same way as when you lived there? Do they still welcome visitors on Sundays for practice, tea, and talk? Or rather, when we are allowed to congregate, will this Sunday event go on again?
Well, Green Gulch is closed for the pandemic, and all of the communities that I know are being very strict about exposure because the risk in a community is so much greater. It's really hard to social distance in a community. So the way to protect the community is to close in the whole thing. So Green Gulch is closed right now. But yes, the Sunday program has been going on for all these years. I gave a Sunday talk last February. And whenever Green Gulch feels it's safe to open, they will resume that Sunday program. And they have other things, other public programs too. They have, if you like to spend like a day on meditation and work and like gardening work and things like that, you can go to their website and find those opportunities, but not until the pandemic allows it.
Okie doke. Can you practice Zen and another religious tradition at the same time?
Oh yes, oh yes. My husband teaches Zen and also teaches Jewish meditation practices. And there's many Christians who practice Zen meditation. Buddhism is a religion that, I think the reason why I myself have been able to stick with Buddhism for a lifetime and be, a Buddhist clergy is that the boundaries of Buddhism range between permeable and non-existent. You can participate in Buddhism without being disloyal or without crossing boundaries that your own beliefs ask. So yes, Buddhist meditation, Buddhism is very compatible with other religions, in my experience, in my knowing of people who have done so.
Okie doke. And which branch of Buddhism has chanting?
They all do. Everybody chants. Some sects chant exclusively, and some don't. We, like our typical morning monastic schedule is like something like 2.5 hours or something like that of meditation and a half an hour of chanting. And then there's chanting in the middle of the day and chanting at the end of the day. The chanting is never, pretty much never, as it doesn't take as much time as the meditation practice. But that's a characteristic of Zen. Zen comes from the Chinese word Chan, and it means meditation. So Zen really is the meditation school of Buddhism. But yes, all Buddhists chant.
Are you finding that this newer generation is embracing the practice of Zen Buddhism, especially given the upheaval in our lives right now?
There's some communities in the country which have a very lively program that appeals to young people. And, as we know, young people have different challenges, they have different inclinations, and they have, you know, they've got a tough road ahead of them. So there's a lot more emphasis, it looks to me like, there's a lot more emphasis on the interpersonal relationships, really developing interpersonal relationships within the Sangha, of people having good friends in the Sangha and having a place to talk. We didn't have that so much, that kind of wasn't what we were doing. The other thing is that young people have economic challenges that was different when I was young. I didn't really have the economic challenges that, you know, our kids do. And so they don't necessarily, as a group, have the luxury of taking 2 years off and going to a Zen monastery and then coming back out and resuming their life. That's kind of tough. So they kind of have to be creative. That's why I think for a lot of young people belong to a group that meets once a week or twice a week, and it becomes their, you know, their local community. And then, you know, if they can get away we have week-long meditations, like all day long, every day for a week. We do that several times a year, and it's you know, if people can get away for one of those a year or one of those every 2 years, it's a good thing to do. But yeah, young people are doing their best.
We're all trying, I guess.
Yeah.
How do your insights come about? Are they daily? Do they come during the meditation practice?
How do my insights come about? Is that what you said?
The question was, how do your insights come about? Are they daily? And do they come during your meditation practice?
That's a good question. I haven't the faintest idea. Let me think. You know, having insight or having understanding, I think is not something that we can particularly control. I think that what we can do is we can calm ourselves with our breath. We can be kind to ourselves. We can become compassionate with ourselves, and then allow that compassion to extend beyond ourselves. But gaining insight is something that we can't really control. So, you know, doing the practice, doing the meditation practice, doing the kindness practice, the compassion practice, you could say maybe that makes it more likely that insight, that we'll be lucky enough to have an insight, but nothing's guaranteed. Insight is a gift.
Another question is, I'm entertaining the idea of becoming involved in some way at Green Gulch, either through classes, study, or in the garden, or maybe other. But first, it might be helpful to take this opportunity to ask if you might share a bit about the atmosphere of your experience there.
Well, it's a small group of people compared to what you might be used to, you know, circulating among. And for that reason, the characteristic really depends on who's there. The characteristic of, you know, let's say 30 or 40 people live at Green Gulch at a time. Sometimes it's more. Those, as you know, probably from other experiences in your life, what that group dynamic is like has to do with who happened to show up. So again, kind of like what I was saying about insight, it's not your best strategy to want something specific from the community when you go there. To go there with an open heart and an open mind, and to see what there is and to see how you can connect and be part of that community, and then to see what there is probably your best bet for an attitude, because we can't. It's like, if you're anyone, those of you who are school teachers, you know how the characteristic of each class was so different from year to year. Or, I had in middle school, I had 5 classes. Each one was like a personality of its own, and it had to do with the combination of people present. So, I'm not quite sure if that's exactly the question that's being asked, but that's what I said.
Okay, another question is, what is your definition of mindfulness?
So mindfulness is generally is being all one thing. Like, our usual activity has to do with our mind being over there and our body being over there and something else being over there. So when our mind and our body are together and unified, and we are aware of our movements with our mind, we are aware of our thoughts with our body, we are aware of our emotions with our body. So, for example, emotion. When we're angry, we tend to think, oh, I'm angry at that person for what they did in this and this and this. But in a mindfulness practice, it might be a good idea to bring yourself back to your body and notice that your heart rate has changed, that you feel some heat and agitation. So to bring the feeling back to the body, to bring the mind back to the body. So just, to bring the whole complicated festival together under one tent.
Okay, a comment and a question. First, I want to thank Kathie for sharing her experiences with us. I'm wondering if your boys have put into practice any of the Buddhist experience they were raised.
Mm. We had a joke when the kids were little. We were all, they were all running around in the, Buddhist communal monasteries and, inventing their games and, and we looked at each other and say, they're all going to grow up to be used car salesmen. Well, our sons, one of them is an attorney. He's a partner at a Manhattan law firm. Wow. And the other one is an artist, and they both live in Brooklyn, and not very far from each other, and they both have children. And their paths have had to do with their capacities, their interests and proclivities, as well as, I think, wanting to see how they could fit into the great wide world after they were, they had a very unique upbringing. So they still appreciate the upbringing. They still love to come back. But they have, chosen different paths. As for how they're influenced now, I think especially Noah, the artist, was involved until he had a child, and until he was married and had a child, involved in the Brooklyn Zen Center. And our son Aaron, the lawyer, he would love to have the time to take up meditation practice, but it will have to wait a few years.
Well, I see the clock, and we only have one more question on this board. I'm just going to ask it really quickly so we can wrap up. How are interpersonal conflicts resolved in a Zen community?
Well, these days there's a whole intentional process, and it's not so different from, you know, the wisdom that we have all come to over the last couple of decades, that when there's in a system of people, when there's an interpersonal conflict, you might want to go directly to the person, but you might also want to get a third person present. It depends on how bad the conflict, you know, it depends on the nature of the conflict. It also depends on the nature of the relationship. If the person is, you know, in charge of your work, then it's a little different than if you're two friends. So there's a lot of wisdom in these days implemented in helping people get through difficulties, and it really has to do with as much direct communication as possible and as much kindness, but also honesty as possible.
Kathie, you have been wonderful. I appreciate the fact that you spent your time preparing and presenting to us. And I think it's very kind that you generously donated your speaking fee to the Marin Food Bank for people that really need it. So thank you very much. And our next speaker program is September 24th at 1 p.m. It's John Rothman, host of the nightly John Rothman Show on KGO 810 AM radio. He'll speak on the presidential election in unpredictable times. You can either register for this event by going to the OAC website and click on public events. We hope that you enjoyed today and hope that you'll participate on our ongoing public forums. Thank you very much for coming today. Bye.